CBS Radio News, Chattanooga's news, talk, and sports leader.
News Talk 1240.
The Chair Force wants you to fly their drones if you're willing, and I don't know why you would be, but if you're interested in flying drones in order to blow people up, then the Air Force has a job for you. Now, have you noticed something, too, that the military seems to be having a bit of a problem with recruitment, where apparently, I guess, not a whole lot of people are signing up because they keep running ads, like, all the time. I keep seeing all these ads for, please join the Navy, please join the Air Force, please join the Marines, please join the Army, all these different ads, and it's like, it's not very likely, dude. No thanks, man. I keep seeing all these different ads about, joining the military and joining the Air Force and yada, yada. And it's, I don't think they have a very good adoption rate. It seems like their recruitment rate isn't doing very well right now because their propaganda campaigns are going full throttle, full speed ahead for their propaganda campaigns. So the United States Air Force is now needing a few hundred good drone pilots. The military brass, which is in charge of America's drones, says that there's a shortage of pilots, according to Ars Technica. And according to the New York Times, a significant number of the 1,200 United States Air Force pilots are coming up for reenlistment and are opting to leave, while a training program is producing only about half of the new pilots that the service is requiring. So what can their solution be? Well, the Air Force does have a few drones, but not nearly as many as the CIA has. Probably not nearly as many as all the different agencies have. The Department of Homeland Security, we know, has drones. FBI, oddly enough, has some drones, which I assume they don't use for international purposes. But all these different agencies use drones in order to blow up people. Colonel James Clough, who's commander of the Air Force's 432nd Wing, invited the Times along with a few other media onto the decade-old nerve center of drone operations outside of Las Vegas on Tuesday. He told them that the Air Force has pulled instructors from schools to the flight line. The agency now conducts 65 drone flights a day, which is a number that's expected to drop to 60 by fall of 2015. So it appears that people are not too keen to join the Air Force or join the military in any sort of capacity. I actually do know a guy who joined the military. He joined the Air Force, actually, and subsequently either left or retired. I don't recall which, but I guess he has no interest in getting back into that. I know some people who are joining the National Guard and the State Guard. I don't think I know anyone who has presently joined the Army, though. I can't think of anyone I know who's presently joined the military other than one or two. So I have very few acquaintances who have joined the military, and it seems that people wanting to join up has dipped down quite significantly. So with the rise of the Islamic State and other boogeymen and other global hotspots, there is increasing pressure on the Air Force to provide more drone flights. But while drone operators get to see their families at night and are half a globe away from their targets, it still takes a toll. I mean, it's a pretty psychologically draining thing to see people get blown up by you pressing a button on a screen. That seems like it would take quite a toll. So having our folks make that mental shift every day, driving into the gate and thinking, all right, I've got my war face on and I'm getting into the fight, and then driving out of the gate and stopping at Walmart to pick up a carton of milk or going to a soccer game on their way home, and the fact that you can't talk about most of what you do at home, all those stressors together are what is putting pressure on the family and putting pressure on the airmen, Colonel Clough says. So I wonder if there's going to be a steep decline in joining. Is there going to be a steep decline in enlistment rates or what have you? Or are we going to be seeing a trend of some sort of spike of people joining in order to fight whatever they want to fight over in whatever region they deem worthy of their attention? So it's interesting to see that, though. Quite a few people I know are actually very much not anti-military, I guess, but anti-joining it themselves. So I wonder if there's if that's becoming more of a trend, or I just know a very select group of people who have no interest. So it's interesting to see anyway. And by the way, speaking of drones, there actually are really good uses for drones, some of which are to fly them for commercial purposes in order to take photography. In fact, one of our very own here at the station, I should say, flies drones for commercial purposes. Eric Judd has his commercial drone service, which he flies around and takes photographs and sells them at actually a very reasonable price. And he takes amazing photographs with his camera, and he does commercial photography and such. That's Eric Judd. Definitely check out his service, and he talks about it quite a lot actually here on Hot News Talk Radio. So definitely give that a look. Amazon is looking to undercut its high-end e-reader with a new 300 pixels per inch Kindle, which is a Paperwhite model. So apparently Ars Technica actually liked Amazon's high-end Kindle Voyager e-reader when they reviewed it last year. They say, though, that their biggest concern was that the $199 dedicated tablet didn't do enough to distance itself from the $119 Kindle Paperwhite. So today, that extra purchase gets even handier or rather harder to justify, since Amazon has now just added the Voyage's 1448 by 1072 300 ppi e-ink Carta screen to the Paperwhite without raising its price. The new version is still $119 with special offers, advertising, and $139 without. Adding 3G boosts the price up to $189 and with ads, and $209 without. So e-readers are becoming very popular nowadays. A lot of people are really jumping onto the e-reader bandwagon. People were really getting into Kindle when that first came out, and the Nook when that also first came out. So people have been jumping onto the e-reader bandwagon for quite a while now. Something that perhaps people don't know is that you actually can read ebooks on your phone. Yeah, you can get ebook readers for your phones without having to pay an extra cost for a e-reader. So it lowers the cost a little bit. There are different ebook readers. In fact, the Amazon Kindle app you can get for Android, and I believe for iPhone, I'm not sure. You can get that for Android, and you can just read books that way, read ebooks that way without having to buy an extra tablet. So it's useful in that sense, but of course, phones tend to not have as good a battery life as e-ink tablets do. So there is that downside, but it's not necessary to spend a whole heck of a lot of money just to read ebooks. It's not a necessary thing. The Kindle Voyage still offers a handful of benefits over the Paperwhite, though. It does have an automatic brightness sensor and a screen that sits flush with the surrounding bezel and capacitive buttons in the bezel for page turning. But none of those features affected the reading experience as much as the screen, which used extra sharpness, I should say, to make the text look as much like actual printed text as possible. Putting that same excellent screen in something that costs $80 less than the Voyage is difficult to recommend. Otherwise, the new Paperwhite doesn't change much. The Wi-Fi version weighs 7.2 ounces, according to Ars Technica, and the e-reader is 0.36 inches thick, or 9.1 millimeters. So if you've ever seen a 9 millimeter bullet, then you know exactly how thick it is. If you've ever seen a 38 bullet, then you know exactly how thick it is, because 9mm and 38 are basically the same thickness, if not exactly. I can never remember if it's exactly the same thickness or it's off by a few grains. I don't recall, but it's still basically the exact same thing. So if you've ever seen a 38 or a 380 or a 9mm bullet, that's about the thickness we'd be talking about. So not very thick at all. And we're talking about the bullet, of course, the projectile itself, not the shell casing and the cartridge. We're talking about just the bullet. So that's about the thickness that you'd be seeing. Is 9.1 millimeters is roughly the same thickness as that as a tablet. So that's a pretty par for the average thickness, actually, for phones and tablets. You'd be seeing that a lot. 9.1 or somewhere in the 9 to 10 range, 9 to 11 range. We see that a lot, actually. Well, there's a kind of a shocker in the European courts, where they've decided that websites are liable for user comments. Now, that sounds a little bit weird. That's like the owner of a building being liable for what people say within it. That sounds a little bit, wrong, I guess would be the word. So according to Ars Technica, in a surprise decision, the European Court of Human Rights, or ECHR, in Strasbourg has ruled that the Estonian news site Delphi may be held responsible for anonymous and allegedly defamatory comments from its readers. As the digital rights organization Access notes, this goes against the European Union's e-commerce directive, which guarantees liability protection for intermediates that implement notice and takedown mechanisms on third-party comments. As such, Peter Mycek, or Mychek, I'm not sure, Senior Policy Counsel at Access, says that the ECHR judgment has dramatically shifted the internet away from the free expression and privacy protections that created the internet as we know it. Now, there are some compelling arguments for what the European Union is trying to push here, or rather what the European Union's court is trying to push here. They're not very good arguments, but there are arguments. They're one of them that I've heard before is that you're inviting sort of defamatory speech by allowing anonymous comments. This is going to mean a lot of potentially fatal things for a lot of different companies. I can think of just a few offhand. 4chan, of course, is going to probably run into a few problems in the European Union. Now, it's not an EU-held site. As far as I know, it is held in the U.S., just as an example. So I don't think that will run into any problems when it comes to that. I'm not sure who personally will be held liable. I don't think Moot could be. Maybe, I'm not sure. So there's a lot of different takes on that. Anyway, that's a whole topic that's going to get a lot of people in trouble if we continue talking about that one. But yeah, it's weird to think though that a website can be held liable for anonymous comments. That seems kind of odd. I mean, you see people on YouTube comments all the time, right? If you want to see the absolute bottom of the barrel when it comes to people commenting on anything, you want to see the bottom of the barrel when it comes to people's opinions on things, either go to a news site because they always have the worst comments, and or look at YouTube. You know, either of those are going to have awful, terrible comments that are just completely vapid and completely useless, but they're free to make them, right? Like, I don't like them and I think they're ridiculous, but they're free to make them, right? That's the difference there. Is I think personally that the comments that these people make are ridiculous and they're wrong and they're incorrect in a lot of their assessments, but I recognize and I fully support their right to post what they want to post. Now, when it comes to defamation, when it comes to libel, when it comes to slander, that's where things start to get a little bit odd. If we're talking about a website that allows for anonymous commenting, well, how can the website really be charged with that if the website itself isn't really responsible? It's user comments. So to take that further, is the owner of the website liable for what somebody says within? That's kind of like if you have, say, a bar and somebody starts to get rowdy within. Well, obviously you'll kick them out, but can you yourself be held liable for anything that they've said? Not really. It doesn't really work that way. But for some odd reason, the folks in the European Union court want it to work that way. And that seems to me to be a little bit misguided, to say the least. Now, there's obviously a pretty big opportunity there for this to be exploited so that it can be used to block people who have dissenting political opinions and that sort of thing. A letter, or rather post, from the Media Legal Defense Initiative summarizes the reasons why the court came to this unexpected decision. The ECHR cited the extreme nature of the comments which the court considered to amount to hate speech, and the fact that they were published on a professionally run and commercial news website, as well as the insufficient measures taken by Delphi to weed out the comments in question, and the low likelihood of a prosecution of the users who posted those comments, and the moderate sanction imposed on Delphi. Yet still, this is something that's been par for the course for the internet for years and years and years and years, or at least 15 years anyway. It seems like weeding out comments such as these is not really worth anybody's time. Has any physical threat ever came out of this, or ever come out of these words in bits on somebody's website? Probably not. Probably we won't see any physical action come out of that. It's just people talking, man. It's just people talking. If you want to see the dregs of the internet, go back to Usenet and look at some of the things that people posted on Usenet way back in the mid-late 90s. There's a lot of really screwed up stuff on there, and it's been going on since the late 80s, the late 90s, all sorts of things. So really, it's not like this is a new trend by any means. So in the wake of this judgment, the legal situation is complicated. In an email to Ars Technica, TJ McIntyre, who is a lecturer in law and chairman of Digital Rights in Ireland, and which is the lead organization that won an important victory against EU data retention in the Court of Justice of the European Union last year, explained where things now stand, saying, today's decision doesn't have any direct legal effect. It simply finds that Estonia's laws on site liability aren't incompatible with ECHR. It doesn't directly require any change in national or EU law, and indirectly, however, it may be influential in further development of the law in a way which undermines freedom of expression. As a decision of the Grand Chamber of the ECHR, it will be given weight by other courts and by legislative bodies. So it seems like the decision over the EU might not have any bearing on us here. It might seem that way. However, a lot of times we'll see trends that occur over in Europe, which then sort of transfer over here to the States. Kind of like how a lot of times things that happen on the West Coast will eventually bleed over into the East Coast and vice versa. That's sort of what's possible to happen here. It's possible that could happen here in the States as well, where for some odd reason a website is held liable for what people post in anonymous comments. Now, the solution, of course, that the EU would posit is that, oh, you just disable comments. It's not really a big deal. That kind of is a big deal for a lot of people, though. Myself included, honestly, because if you delete or get rid of the whole commenting system, that sort of takes the, not sure if democratic is the right word, but it takes a lot of the process out of the news. That takes a lot of the feedback out of the news if nobody can ever comment on something and point out something that a writer hasn't really addressed properly. Especially if you look at different tech articles, you'll see comments that are actually very useful, and the writer of that article will use that in order to alter his own text with, of course, the permission of the commenter in order to make the article more informative. So we see that a lot online. So taking out the commenting system out of an online forum or online news source, that really takes a lot away from the internet in and of itself. That's like if on Twitter you couldn't reply to tweets. That's essentially the same idea. And that's not really how it works. That's really pushing the boundaries of what we're used to seeing when it comes to the internet. I mean, commenting is just a fundamental part of the internet. And I can't imagine that they would try to find, over in the courts, I can't imagine they'd try to find Twitter liable for user tweets. That seems to be pretty far-fetched. So fortunately, this probably isn't going to go anywhere, but it does open up some interesting ideas. It opens up a lot of thought when it comes to the usage of the internet and how it's treated in the legal system. Honestly, I don't know why we keep passing laws and regulations regarding the internet anyway. It's been self-regulating for so long now. It seems like having more laws surrounding it is just a waste of time, which it is. Well, speaking of that, the Electronic Frontier Foundation and the ACLU are appealing license plate reader cases to the California Supreme Court. And by the way, if you're looking to get a used car, top quality, by the way, nice and clean and good looking for sometimes $2,000 less than the other lots. There's a good little car lot, very unpretentious, that you should check out east of Central High on Highway 58. It's called Automax. They have low overhead, no staff, and Louis does everything himself, and he's passing the savings on to you. Every car, or rather everyone can get a car and rebuild credit over at Automax. That's Automax at 643-2886. It's Automax 643-2886, and ask for Louis, and he'll help you out to get a car that's sometimes $2,000 less than the other lots. So tell him that you heard about him over on Hot News Talk Radio, AM 1240. So the Electronic Frontier Foundation and the ACLU are appealing license plate reader cases to the California Supreme Court. Two privacy activist groups are now formally appealing and have formally appealed on Tuesday to the California Supreme Court in their attempt to compel two Southern California law enforcement agencies to release 1 week's worth of license plate reader data. Now, the problem with disclosures such as these is that the different agencies involved will always cite something along the lines of national security or officer safety. Those two things are paramount to their counter argument when it comes to releasing information about license plate reader data or cell site simulator data or what have you, all these different unlawful entities. So on May 2013, the Electronic Frontier Foundation, or EFF, and the ACLU, the American Civil Liberties Union of Southern California, or ACLU SoCal, had sued the Los Angeles Police Department and the Los Angeles Sheriff's Department in order to gain access to the data as a way to better understand the surveillance technology. The groups lost in 2014 at the lower court level and last month at the appellate court. Both agencies, like many others nationwide, use license plate readers, or LPRs or ALPRs, in order to scan cars and compare them at incredible speeds to a hot list of stolen or wanted vehicles. In some cases, that data is kept for weeks, months, or even years, and handing over such a volume of records by a California law agency or a law enforcement agency is not without precedent. Now, people are going to say, well, don't you want the police to make sure that your car is not stolen? Well, it's a matter of principle when it comes right down to it. It is a matter of principle because they're scanning your car, which is your own property, without any sort of warrant. So this is a search, you might say, of a car without any sort of warrant and is thus, well, unwarranted and possibly even illegal. Also, all of this information is retained for quite a long time, and we're not exactly certain what information is held along with license plate data. So we aren't particularly certain of that. Now, you could argue that because you're on a public roadway, you have no reasonable expectation of privacy. That depends on jurisdiction, because some jurisdictions will see you in your vehicle as a reasonable expectation of privacy. Others don't. It just depends on where you are. But when it comes down to it, it's the law enforcement agencies using what they're calling a reasonable tool in order to do something which is entirely unreasonable. Also, it costs people quite a lot of money. And that should be a defining factor in this as well, is that this costs a lot of money. And I don't know if Los Angeles actually has that money. So that's worth looking at as well. But this is Digital Drive. I'm your host, Russell. It's the show we talk about technology and quite a bit more. We're going to be talking more about license plate reader data and your own personal safety, security, and privacy right here on Hot News Talk Radio, AM 1240 and hotnewstalkradio.com.
This is a mob mode. This is the mob mode. What kind of fool do you think I am? You think I know nothing of the mob?
You give us 12 minutes and 40 seconds, we'll give you Chattanooga and the world.
News Talk 1240.
Hi, this is your computer speaking. I don't feel so well. It's like I've come down with a bug, and I'm getting slower.
Affordable Computers. We fix sick computers. Your hometown guys at Affordable Computers will repair your PC in half the time of the big boys at an affordable price. No tricks, no gimmicks, no computer speak techno babble. Just good, quick, and courteous affordable service and repairs. Want to affordably supercharge your PC? Affordable Computers on Highway 58. Affordable Computers hand builds all desktops in-house. If you're looking for a better than new refurb laptop, $150 will get you a Dell or another name brand at Affordable Computers. Affordable Computers, Highway 58, between Arby's and Taco Bell. Also Fort O, Battlefield Parkway near Holcombs. Affordable Computers. We service what we sell. Call 499-1975. That's 499-1975.
Wow, this is amazing. I'm feeling great. Supercharged.
Do you feel better outside your home or business than in? Indoor air quality is important. Mildew, mold, smoke, water, and rodent damage are prime causes of poor indoor air quality. Ducts Indoor Air Professionals, better known as Duct Busters, cleans HVAC systems using 127 definable Duct Busters steps. Let Mark Thompson address the indoor air quality at your business to help reduce employee illnesses. Prevent fires by cleaning your dryer vents. Mark and his parents, Dick and Joan Thompson, have been building our local economy and helping local people with HVAC systems 16 years. Ducts Indoor Air Professionals. Call 876-9907. 876-9907. Ducks. Call now.
We've got a table here at Delia's in Saudi Daisy, ready to delight in a plate of authentic Mexican food. Delia's spreads a rich selection, loaded nachos, crazy chicken, homemade tamales, maybe the enchiladas with beef, chicken, pork, quesadillas. Every dish beautifully pictured on the menu to help us decide. Join us for lunch or dinner. We're at Delia's in Saudi Daisy on Dayton Pike near the Thrasher Light. Here's dinner. Delia's uses the freshest ingredients, cooked to perfection. Nachos, homemade. Delia's open every day except the Lord's Day. For lunch and dinner, treat yourself to Delia's genuine Mexican food. In Saudi, call 521-7145. That's 521-7145.
You give us 12 minutes and 40 seconds, we'll give you Chattanooga and the world.
News Talk 1240.
You love your hometown. Are you interested in free markets, in local economy? Do you hope that Chattanooga can survive the next meltdown, the next chain of disasters in the national economy? What's the best way to live out the ideals of self-government and self-determination? Join me, David Toulis, weekdays 1 to 3.
Hot News Talk 1240.
Love your neighbor, buy local.
You give us 12 minutes and 40 seconds, we'll give you Chattanooga and the world.
Hot News Talk 1240.
Fox News Radio. I'm Lillian Wu. At least one person's dead in Texas after Bill, now a tropical depression, soaks the state. Reuters reporting a 62-year-old woman died yesterday when she lost control of her car on a rain-soaked highway near the central town of West. Meanwhile, dangers remain today.
Emergency pumps currently running out at Lake Worth, which is owned by the city of Fort Worth. A handful of homes along there flooded with the last rain event, but city leaders say less rainfall with the remnants of Tropical Storm Bill is actually working in their favor at the moment.
Fox's Casey Stiegel, another juror released in the James Home movie theater massacre trial in Colorado.
The prosecution may wrap this case as soon as this Friday. The defense says no matter what, they won't be able to start until June 25th.
Fox's Adam Housley and the American killed while fighting ISIS alongside Kurdish forces in Syria, laid to rest in Massachusetts. Fox News, we report,
You give us 12 minutes and 40 seconds, we'll give you Chattanooga and the world.
News Talk 1240.
So we got ALPRs, we got drones, we got all sorts of nonsense going on. And what more can we expect really from our very own protectors? And something that keeps popping up, though, is people talk about respect for authority and all that sort of thing. Oh, nothing gets me more steamed when people talk about respect for authority, because I have none, so that argument immediately goes out the window. You should have, should have is always the worst argument, because it's implying that their projection should apply to me, which obviously doesn't work. So people talking about, you should have respect for the military because they blow up people. I do have respect for the military. That's the funny thing, though. I have quite tremendous respect for people who've served and all that sort of thing. Of course, it's very important to have. I just don't really like the leadership that much, because that's where the problems start to arise. You start having people who are causing really terrible situations overseas, and I really don't have much of any respect for that, because it's terrible situations that we keep creating in different regions and ruining lives and ruining regions and that sort of thing. So I don't really have a whole lot of respect for that. Now, the individuals who are involved in serving, fine. I have respect for that, obviously. I know quite a few people who have done that, and I have no problem with them, but it's obnoxious when people don't understand the difference between just blatant nationalism and blind hero worship and actual reason. People don't seem to differentiate between that, and it's very, very obnoxious. People don't seem to understand that there's a difference between being cautiously questioning and being anti this or that. I'm cautiously questioning of a lot of different things without being completely anti this or that. Like I'm cautiously questioning different things regarding the computer entertainment industry or encryption and that sort of thing. Doesn't mean I'm anti-computers or anti-encryption or anything along those lines. I just ask questions and I question a lot of things, so it doesn't make me anti much of anything. Well, I'm not anti-sheriff's departments by any means. I don't know of anyone who could ever make that argument about me, but I'm very much questioning of their tactics when it comes to the license plate readers. I don't have a whole lot of respect for their usage of license plate readers, because it seems as though, it's quite a big invasion on my privacy, and it makes everyone a suspect, whereas everyone really shouldn't be a suspect. It creates a file for everybody. It puts everyone in some sort of giant file system, and it just perpetuates perpetuates, I should say, the idea that everyone belongs in a database somewhere. It's all very barcode, it's all very neo-future. It's all very obnoxious, really, is a better word for it. So as Ars Technica has previously reported, the writer of the article has run into similar walls that the ACLU and the Electronic Frontier Foundation have run into when trying to get disclosures about license plate readers over in Los Angeles. Various agencies that were queried by Ars Technica, including the LAPD and the LA Sheriff's Department and the San Mateo County Sheriff's Office and the Piedmont Police Department, have all denied such records under 6254F of the California Public Records Act and a related provision, which is subsection K. So in 2013, it says, we outlined some previous California judicial findings as to why we didn't think the government claims hold water. That included Haney versus the Superior Court from 2001. A California appellate court again found that law enforcement agencies could not summarily restrict access. Yet, by including routine and everyday within the ambit of the investigations in section 6254, I should say, F, we did not mean to shield everything law enforcement officers do from disclosure. Often officers make inquiries of citizens for purposes related to crime prevention and public safety that are unrelated to either civil or criminal investigations. The records of investigation exempted under Section 6254F encompass only those investigations undertaken for the purpose of determining whether a violation of law may occur or has occurred. So lots of questions are worth asking, certainly, when it comes to the police department and the sheriff's department and their usage of license plate readers. Quite a few questions really need to be asked, because it appears that they're not exactly using these license plate readers in, well, a way that I approve of anyway, right? It seems like the license plate readers that they're using are being used in order to create a database of everyone who's ever existed. And it seems like there's no such thing as real privacy anymore. Now think about it. Can you exist without anyone really knowing that you exist? You really can't. You don't have that anymore. And I would argue that you have a right to that, but we don't really have that, if that makes any sense. Like, obviously, I have a right to privacy. This is a common law thing. It's recognized. I have a right to that. Pardon me, getting all mixed up today. I have a right to that. However, it's not really recognized by much of anyone, actually, because if you talk about a right to privacy and a right to not have a database record of you, people don't really recognize that, and they say, well, it's a part of the process and yada, yada. It's a very obnoxious how people will say that it's a necessary evil because we live in a post 9/11 world where all these things are necessary in order to make us secure and yada yada, when really that's not very true. It's just a repetition of rhetoric that's been used for so long by all these different agencies in order to convince us that what they do is really the true and proper thing to do. So it's very, very annoying when you keep hearing people say, oh, it's a necessary evil, it's necessary for keeping us secure and yada, yada. Very annoying. So is it really necessary to keep a record on everyone ever in order to maintain our security? And it seems that the answer is no. It seems that the answer is actually quite obviously no. We do have a right to privacy, and yet this isn't really recognized by much of anyone in government. Look at Mr. Graham, Senator Lindsey Graham, who's talking about how we need the Patriot Act, and to get rid of the Patriot Act would just be the worst thing ever. So obviously he doesn't recognize the right to privacy. Obviously. He doesn't recognize that people should be able to exist without there being database records of us. Now, I'm not just pinpointing him because I don't like him, although I don't, but it's not just him. It's almost everyone in any sort of position of leadership anywhere. Even though his really isn't a position of leadership, it's a position of lawmaking, which is completely different. He really doesn't have any authority at all when it comes to much of anything. I don't have to do what he says, as an example. I don't. He could walk into the room and give me an order and I don't have to follow it, that sort of thing. The same goes for a police officer. If he gives me a direct order, I don't actually really have to follow that 90% of the time. And if it's an unlawful order, they'll claim it's lawful. It's not. I don't really have to do what they say. So there's a lot of different things going on here, where there's authority that doesn't actually exist, and yet they'll claim that it does, even though it really doesn't. It's a very annoying and complicated situation. But the fact of the matter is, I do have a right to privacy. I should be able to exist without there being any sort of database record that's on me that's being held by any sort of government. Now, obviously, in today's world, this is almost inevitably unavoidable to have some sort of record that's kept on you, right? Think about it. When you're born, your parents probably assigned you with a social security number. And 9 times out of 10, this happens, right? Like probably more than 9 times out of 10. 9.999 times out of 10, when you're born, you're assigned with a social security number. I was, you probably were, everybody was. We don't even think about it because we think, well, I got to get my benefits. You know, it's always my benefits that it all comes down to, because the government's somehow going to fulfill the promise to give you money, even though really they're not that obligated to do so, especially if you haven't paid into it like me. But anyway, so we all think of this as a way to achieve benefits. And yet upon doing so now, our parents unwittingly, possibly, put us into a database that we now forever exist in until that database ceases to exist. So we run into that problem now where everyone is in a database of some sort. And I'm not talking about databases for, you know, marketing like Google collects and that sort of thing. That's a little bit different, although arguments could be made against that as well. What I'm talking about is an involuntary bringing into a database that really I didn't want to be in the first place. I've done nothing wrong, so I shouldn't be in any sort of database, and it's all just very obnoxious. But people will defend that. They'll defend the idea of different police agencies and the FBI and the U.S. Marshal Service and the IRS putting us all into little compartments in order to not just keep us in check, although I'm sure there's some psychological way they do that too, but it's also just to make sure that everyone is indexed properly for both taxing purposes, for marketing purposes, for market control purposes. It's all a very annoying thing. And it's hard to get out of. Really, the only way for this to go away in a peaceable manner would be for all the parents today to just decide they're not going to sign their kids up for Social Security, right? Like, wouldn't that be cool if all the parents today who are having kids decided, you know what, I'm not going to sign my kid up for Social Security. That's just not going to happen. My kid is not going to be getting the benefits anyway, so why sign this kid up for something that he can't possibly consent to in the first place? So we'll just not do that. We'll forego that whole process and forget about it. So if that were to happen, the Social Security system would collapse completely, and that would be great, but that's highly unlikely that it's going to happen. So until it collapses of its own accord naturally, we sort of have to wait for it to happen. By the way, the FDA just now is following through on its plan to ban trans fat, announced partially hydrogenated vegetable oils, which is the primary source of trans fats in human diets, from the list of items that fall into the category of generally recognized as safe. The move, which is formally proposed last November, will mean that food makers must remove these fats from any products before 3 years is up. So dietary intake of trans fats is strongly linked to coronary heart disease, and studies have linked these fats to tens of thousands of deaths each year in the United States. Although the precise mechanism by which they influence the human body isn't exactly clear, it is clear how they get into the human body in the first place, which is we put them there in the form of a very industrialized food processing services that we're all so fond of. So the FDA has decided that they're going to act in our best interests, although probably not, and we no longer have trans fats, or at least supposedly we're not going to have hydrogenated oil or something along those lines, right? So it seems that the different federal agencies will sort of do their own apologetics when it comes to their own existence. Different federal agencies really like to do apologetics for themselves and say that, well, we need to exist because look at all the good we do. And that's just one example of that happening, where the FDA will do something that on its face seems to be quite positive, but on the other hand, it's backed by force always. Think about that. Whenever you think about a service of any sort, we think about the FDA doing what it does. We think about the different programs that we have to give free ebooks to kids. We think about all the cool different programs that we have that are very beneficial. They're always backed by violence because they have to be in order to exist. All these different programs must be backed by violence in order to exist. So we think about how, boy, I'm sure glad that we have this program that, gives the elderly free money, but it's not free because also it's backed by violence. It always has to be. If you were to suddenly decide, I'm just not going to pay taxes today, I've decided to no longer do that. You have been previously. There's that threat of force behind the paying of taxes, because you do this in order to appease the beast. You do this in order to appease the system, which will, if you cease payment, will give you bills and bills and bills and more bills, and then eventually kick down your door and shoot your dog and arrest you. And that's the system that we have now, which is backed by force. So any sort of social program for tax collection has to be backed by force. It's involuntary and it's immoral, and yet people will defend it to the last. And it's very unfortunate that people, for some reason, think that this is a great thing and a good thing, and it's a necessary evil, right? It's always necessary evil, even though there's really not any such thing. Well, thanks to older moms, the United States now has a birth rate that's actually in the positive. So older moms, we thank you. We salute you here at Digital Drive. Being the child of an older mom, I can assert that it doesn't have necessarily the health defects that people constantly think that it does. You think, oh, I can't have kids at 35. My kids will all be, they'll all have mental disabilities and they'll have deformed limbs and such. And as a child of an older mom, I can tell you that that's not actually the case. My mother was 35 when she had me, and she was 40 when she had my sister. So we all turned out okay, and we're the peak of physical perfection. So really, it's not much to worry about. So thanks to older moms, the United States birth rate has increased for the first time in 7 years. For the first time in 7 years, according to The Verge, the United States birth rate has increased by 1% in 2014 compared to the year before. The CDC-MP, or the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, is reporting. The increase wasn't universal, though. The teen birth rate has dropped by 9%, which is a record low. The general fertility rate grew to 63 births per 1,000 women in 2014 from 62.5 births per 1,000 in 2013. But if teens are having fewer children, how did the birth rate increase? Well, women in the 30s and 40s are now having more kids, and it's showing up in the CDC statistics. Births among women in their 30s increased by 3%, for women in their 40s by 2%. The change was apparent for women of all races, the researchers are reporting, except among American Indian and Alaska Native women who experienced actually a decrease, which is unfortunate. The proportion of births among older married women has increased, while the proportion of unmarried younger women who gave birth went down. There are probably many reasons for this change, but an increase in contraceptive use most certainly played a role. More women are using different contraceptives than they were 20 years ago, and different methods of contraceptives are now getting popularity because of their ease of use. In fact, if you ask the CDC about it, the answer is pretty clear. The best contraceptives for teens are actually implants, and it looks like the usage of such is actually paying off because the birth rates for teens has decreased pretty significantly. The most recent peak in teen births occurred in 1991. Back then, there were close to 62 births for every 1,000 women aged 15 to 19, and today the rate is 24 per 1,000, which means that teen births have decreased by more than 60% in a quarter century. It is a slow change, but it's still very good news. Children born to teenage parents are more likely to be born prematurely, and they're more likely to suffer from poor health early on in life, and so on and so forth. So older mothers are actually increasing in numbers. And again, as a child of an older mother, I can tell you that that isn't really a problem. For some odd reason, people think that being born to somebody who's 30 or older, you're going to have horrible birth defects and all that sort of thing. I have never experienced that. I know quite a few people who are children of older mothers and didn't experience that either. So I don't know where that idea comes from. But yeah, that's not at all the case. Have you heard about Hyperloop? Very exciting thing. Hyperloop is a new-ish idea that's supposedly going to lead to a new form of public transit that is in a vacuum. And yeah, it actually is in a vacuum. It's a pod, which is in a vacuum, which allows it to travel with limited friction. It's frictionless, not frictionless, if that makes any sense. Frictionless, meaning that it has less friction than normal atmosphere, but it's not without friction entirely. So it's frictionless, not frictionless. So the Hyperloop's biggest questions are still unanswered. Less than 2 years after it was first announced, Elon Musk's, according to The Verge, Hyperloop seems to be making great progress. 2 independent companies have now launched projects in order to build versions of the high-speed transportation system, drawing from Musk's open source plans. Yesterday, Musk's own SpaceX announced that it's building a test track that will host a pod racing competition. Hopefully this has nothing at all to do with Anakin Skywalker, in which groups will compete to design the most aerodynamic crafts. After a spectacularly unconventional development, the idea is now closer to reality than it ever has been. So this could be the future of public transportation. Now, we here in the Chattanooga area are not too familiar with public transit. We don't really see a whole lot of that. Yeah, we have CARTA and we have the shuttle, but other than that, public transportation is not really something that we're very used to, especially train transportation, subways and that sort of thing. Very foreign idea to us. Now, in Atlanta, they do have subways. Of course, in New York, they do have subways. I've been on them. They're nasty. And other places around the country, they have subways, but not so much here, which is kind of interesting. Possibly reasons for that is that Chattanooga is very much full of rock, very rocky here. I mean, they call it Rocky Top for a reason. Lots of different rocks and geological oddities here in the Chattanooga area. In the Ringgold, North Georgia area, especially, there's clay everywhere, and there's different gravel and all that sort of thing. Very difficult to blast through. There's limestone everywhere, so that creates a few problems. Granite, of course. So it's leads to a few problems when it comes to blasting. It makes things very expensive. So building a subway is a very expensive endeavor, and of course, it's paid for by us. So the Hyperloop may not actually solve that problem because, again, it'd still be very expensive, but it could be above ground. Well, it's good news for progress on Hyperloop. Even a 5-mile Hyperloop represents a significant challenge, and settling on craft design will be an important part of any system. So again, some background on Hyperloop. It's a sort of subway system that operates based on a vacuum. So it's in a chamber that's in a vacuum. Think of a cylinder that's in a vacuum, and then you have a pod within that, and the pod moves forward within this vacuum, meaning that there's no friction, or rather there's very limited amounts of atmospheric friction, which allows this thing to go at supersonic speeds, thus Hyperloop. Well, but by tackling the problems that are arising, the teams are sidestepping the Hyperloop's harder problems and avoiding the technology's most central questions. If you're wondering how fast Hyperloop can go, how safe it will be at high speeds, a capsule design competition won't do you much good. And a 5-mile test track will only give you the slightest glimpse of the important challenges ahead. As a result, what looks like a step forward may actually be sort of a holding pattern. It's more of a step sideways, not quite backward, not quite forward. It's more of a jump in place or jogging in place. The biggest issues are speed and scale. The Hyperloop was pitched as faster and cheaper than alternatives such as cars and trains, but even small shifts in those numbers can dramatically change how it stacks up. So it's easy to imagine safety concerns limiting Hyperloop's needs to just a fraction of its theoretical top speed, or right-of-way issues keeping stations far from urban centers. Would we still be excited about the Hyperloop if a 30-minute trek became a 3-hour one? Well, what if it cost $60 billion instead of the promised $6 billion? After enough setbacks, it might not be worth developing the technology at all. Those deployment delays are life or death issues for Hyperloop, but as long as the tests are focused on small-scale loops, it's not clear we'll ever get answers to them. So what they consider to be small-scale might cause problems too, depending on what your view on public transit is. Small scale might be from, say, North Shore over to South Side. That could be small scale, depending on how you want to look at it. So it raises some challenges. Now, until we have a public transportation system, or at least a private transportation system that's paid for private money that goes from Chattanooga to Atlanta, I will not be happy. Why don't we have that yet? Why hasn't there been some entrepreneur to set up a system of travel between here and Atlanta? Wouldn't that be cool if you could just have lunch in Atlanta and come back here within 30 minutes? That would be so neat. But unfortunately, that's very expensive. There's a lot of bureaucracy in the way, and we probably won't be seeing that anytime soon. Oh well. Something that we have to keep in mind, though, when we talk about public transit is all these things are always backed by force. That's an idea that really needs to be understood, and it's an idea that really needs to be pushed. Anytime we talk about any sort of program that we think is going to be for the greater good, it's going to be awesome, it's going to be really helping out the public, we have to remember that anytime we have a program that helps out the public, it's going to be hurting a lot of people as well, because this requires huge amounts of tax dollars, and huge amounts of tax dollars means somebody's going to have to pay more taxes than somebody else. And is that exactly fair? Now, we keep talking about how the rich people need to pay more taxes, and is that actually fair? How are they going to be funding businesses? How are they going to be creating new businesses, even if half of their money is taken away? It doesn't seem quite fair, actually, when it comes right down to it. We're very much prejudiced against wealthy people for some odd reason, because we believe that they're the root of all evil. We have to create a boogeyman of some sort in order for us to think that we're better than everyone else, to take the moral high ground or the military high ground or whatever high ground. We always have this idea that we need to be better than everyone else, and that seems to be a very dangerous idea. Lots of different civilizations have tried that, and it usually led to a lot of people dying, and whether the civilization knew about it or not, but the higher-ups were killing a lot of people. And we keep seeing that from century to century, where we tell ourselves we're economically superior, and thus we need to stop all these different countries from acquiring wealth in order to attain our economic superiority. And as a result, thousands of people in those countries die of starvation, or die from lack of health care, or die from anything else you want. So it seems that constant claims of superiority aren't really going to help us forward in any way, as long as we ourselves keep telling ourselves that we're somehow better than everyone else and keep putting down other people, because then we'll be less accepting of other ideas in order to progress ourselves technologically, medically, all sorts of different ways. So really putting ourselves on a pedestal isn't going to help us out anyway, and it's always backed by force anyway, thus is immoral. Well, this is Digital Drive. I'm your host, Russell. The show we talk about technology and quite a bit more. Duganomics.com with David Toulis is coming up next, the show which is not backed by force, and you will not be shot for not listening to it. The show is on every weekday here on Hot News Talk Radio from 1 to 3, right here at Hot News Talk Radio, AM 1240. By the way, this is AM 1240 Hot News Talk Radio. We are everywhere. Listen live to Hot News Talk Radio at hotnewstalkradio.com. Download the TuneIn Radio app to listen live on your smartphone as well.
This is a mob mode. This is the mob mode.